This is A Geek Leader. Hey, Geek Leaders. Welcome to episode 128 of the podcast. And I wanted to start out the show with reading a review. This one's from Eugene Reyes, and it just says, amazing. John and his interviews are a great motivation for people whose interests are technology field. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Eugene. I appreciate it as well. And I would love it if you guys listening right now would just stop what you're doing. And if you haven't subscribe to the podcast for sure. That should be the first thing you do. But then after that, head on over to Apple Podcasts, even if you're an Android user, because that's where I read most of my reviews from, and write a review. It helps the show. It helps me get motivated to do more episodes, and it also helps people find the show. Our listenership has grown significantly over the last few years, so please head on over and do that. One last call to action for the day. Head on over to techleaders.group. That's https://techleaders.group. That's a site that I set up where I've got just one really simple form. I'm just asking for your name and email address. If you're interested in being part of a tech leadership kind of mastermind or small group where I'll be part of it as well. We'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about things that we're working on, we're struggling on, and we'll have regular calls and webinars. I've had several people sign up already, and I'm going through that list. And if you haven't got a response from me yet, don't worry. I'm still working through it, and I'll be responding to people individually. We'll set up some type of call to talk about what's going on in the group and see if you're a good fit for that group going forward. Again, head on over to techleaders.group. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show we've got Liz Kislik. And Liz has been a management consultant and executive coach and facilitator for all kinds of things for great companies for over 30 years, including American Express, the Girl Scouts, which we all love their cookies, and some pharmaceutical companies, and Highlights. And if you don't remember the Highlights magazine growing up as a kid, then you didn't live. So Liz, thank you for coming on the show. It's an honor to have you on. And if you don't mind just helping us out and give us some context and tell the audience a little bit about how you got started doing what you're doing, how you got into to being an executive coach and a management consultant, and why does that matter to us?
Okay, John, thank you. That was a lovely introduction. So when I got out of college, most of my friends were going to grad school, but I knew I wanted to make something happen as opposed to just learning about things. And so I took a job with a marketing agency where I had worked one summer, actually 2 summers before, now that I think about it. I interviewed a bunch of different places. I thought I might like advertising, marketing, PR, that sort of thing, and went to the place where I had some experience, because that way I had a head start. And I did practically every job they had there. They changed my job almost every 6 months because, and this is a point that may be useful to your audience, I don't like a vacuum. So I was always doing things that were outside my job before they were assigned to me. And so I got promoted basically every 6 months for a few years, which was very exciting, very scary, hard work. At one point, I managed a 300 employee call center. I was 23 at the time.
Wow.
Very scary.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. Worst job I ever had, but I learned a lot. And I was pretty happy there and learning all kinds of interesting things. It was a privately held firm, and the owner had cancer and died, and there was no clear succession plan. And so through the various transitions that happened there, it became clear to me that the firm was going in a direction that I didn't support. It was taking a lower level of client work. It was more commoditized work. It wasn't the kind of high-end marketing that I thought was exciting and interesting. And the majority of the work was telemarketing, and this was at a time when telemarketing was going bad, if that's a polite way to say it.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to be there. So it made sense for me to get out. And at the time, in fact, I was pregnant with my first kid. And within a week after I had gone, other consultants in the field were subcontracting work to me because I was a known entity. And I just never stopped. I built my practice, and I migrated from telemarketing through customer service, contact center management, and then because every problem the business has ends up in some form or other in the call center, because that's where people talk to customers, I started really seeing how companies operated. And any leadership that was willing to hear my 2 cents got it. And that's how I migrated into doing much more of strategy, leadership development, team development, and the kind of general purpose, figuring out what's going wrong and what we could do to fix it. So that's sort of the whole trajectory.
Wow. So it's kind of like you kind of just fell into where you're at then, for the most part.
Yeah. And dog paddled all the way. But it has been really rewarding and interesting all the time.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of us seem to fall into our careers. And there was a really good book that I read many years ago called The Accidental Creative, where Todd Henry, the author, talked about how sometimes we accidentally fall into a creative role or a role that we didn't expect. And I think technology is a lot like that, because we go to school to learn maybe one specific language or one specific skill set, and then we get out there and we realize that, we also have to know how to work with people. We have to know how to lead people. We have to know how to communicate. We have all these other skills, maybe project management, that we didn't learn that are necessary for us to be successful.
Absolutely right. Yep. And you have to learn new technologies constantly, unless you're going to be in a narrow little niche, because companies are changing things all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I teach part-time at Winthrop University, and I was telling my students, the things that I teach you in this class will be out of date by the time you graduate.
Yeah. Sometimes the principles hold. You have to hope for that.
Yeah, we hope. Hopefully, we'll teach them how to learn, and we'll teach them the
right.
So they can continue to learn going forward. And also, you're right. The principles, a lot of the principles do hold. It's just the languages that you use.
That's right.
When I was in school, we learned C++, and that's not a thing anymore. Really, I mean,
Nope.
It's still out there, but a lot of people aren't using it.
Right. But the other thing that's so interesting is you never know when you're going to get hired into a company that's dealing with some legacy system from who knows how far back. And you actually have to become expert in something that theoretically is no longer marketable.
Yeah.
That's an interesting problem that tech people face all the time, too.
Yeah, it definitely does. I know at my last company we I think they still do have an AS400 mainframe, and when you yeah, you remember those.
Reliable workhorse.
Exactly, and it's one of those things where you still have to keep that running, and even though a lot of the interfaces are done with other technologies, that core system is still the backbone of the company, and it's getting harder and harder to find people with COBOL experience that can keep that thing going. Yes,
it's almost like you have to MacGyver it.
Yeah.
To make sure. But that's such a valuable thing, to be able to deal with that kind of constraint and keep learning about what's new and current.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you said, there are very few people. So if you have skills that almost nobody else has, when the need for them comes up, could be a plum opportunity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's one of those hard things to do, though, because you almost feel like you have to pick a path. Either I'm going to stick with this or I'm going to learn something new. It's very rare that you find someone who says, I'm willing to do both.
That's true. That's true. On the other hand, once you're in the job, whatever it is, you kind of have to do what the job requires.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You do have to do what's asked for you, whether or not it's, kind of in what you think is your best interest at the time or not.
Right.
But also you can still, and I try to tell people this, you're responsible for your own careers, and if I tell you I need you to learn COBOL and to stick with COBOL and you want to do something else, you can do both. You have the opportunity to learn the other one on your own time. And, that's one of the things I did. I was the manager of a web and mobile development team, but at one point it was just a web team. But I saw, in the horizon, mobile's coming. And it's one of those things where I feel like I need to learn mobile. So I got my own Apple developer's license as soon as the iPhone came out, started writing my own apps, and they were just little silly games that I did for my own, benefit. But that skill ended up transcending into the ability whenever our CIO said, hey, we need to also get into mobile development. I was like, hey, I have that skill set. Give it to me. I'll take it.
Yes. That's exactly right. And that's how you ensure that you are always valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And more valuable than somebody the company can find off the street who just has the new skills.
Right. Yeah, because you also have the domain knowledge that comes along with that business as well.
Correct. And that's a crucial mix. And very often what I see in some of my client companies is that if somebody is a truly talented tech but doesn't understand the business they're in, they can't apply their skills as well.
No, yeah, you're definitely right. Understanding your business is really important. So how is it that you teach someone that comes out of college or comes from a different industry that understanding this business is also important and crucial for your growth? Because a lot of people think, well, at least in technology, software is software, IT is IT. How do you get past that idea that, business domain knowledge is extremely valuable if you want to advance in this career?
So I think there are a bunch of different ways into that issue. One of the things is that the company has to be ready and geared up, that it's actually part of the process of bringing somebody in. Companies talk a lot about onboarding, but they usually mean things like, do you have your passwords and do you know where your desk is? And not enough about, do you know the mechanics of this business and how we make money, which I know sounds dumb that it wouldn't be obvious. It's not always obvious. And the investment in making a new person fully functional includes things like giving them the company history and things like almost trotting them around to the right people or through the right kind of training that actually explains this is the business model, these are our values, here's how we make crucial decisions, here are our long-term goals, because everybody needs context to do their job well. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are. So the other kind of path into this is actually using analogies.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the analogies or metaphors I like to use in training has to do with going to the dentist. And that's because everybody's had the experience and most people are a little wary of it. And so it provides a lot of lively examples about how uncomfortable it can be if somebody does to you the thing that they do without taking you fully into account. Like there are the people who, can't handle a Novocaine shot. They're terrified of needles. And there are other people who react badly to the gas. So if you have a cavity, you need your dentist to deal with you the way you are. It doesn't matter if the dentist prefers one way or the other.
Right.
Otherwise, you have a really bad experience.
Yeah, and I've seen onboarding go very well and very, very poorly. And you're right. And a lot of people think, well, that's up to HR to handle the onboarding. But in my opinion, I think it's up to the manager. The manager has to, HR has to do their part, but the manager has to also make sure that the employee feels valued, that they're brought up to speed, that they're taught about the culture, the cultural norms within that team, introduced to everybody. Because I've seen several people that started a new job and their manager just walked them to their desk and said, "Here you go, get started," and walked away and never introduced them to people.
Yeah, that's horrible. A partnership with HR can be really valuable because the HR business partner can make sure that this kind of in-depth introduction stays on track. It's too easy for managers to be taken up with, the priorities of the day, and to think that once they make the deal with the new employee, the new person's working already. But in fact, there's a whole learning curve, and it takes them a while to get up to speed. The other thing, oddly, to your point, is that in the same way that sometimes folks in IT are not fully conversant with what the business does and how it does it, as is true of internal service organizations, HR doesn't always know either, which is really shocking and horrifying, but it is sometimes true.
Yeah, wow. So speaking of onboarding and bringing people on, sometimes you make those bad decisions and you hire someone that maybe you shouldn't have hired, or maybe you didn't bring them on properly. I don't know. It could be anybody's fault, let's say. But let's say you get to that situation where the employee isn't quite working out. And I know you've talked a lot about conflict at work or having difficult conversations. How is it that a new manager or new team lead would have a difficult conversation for someone that's not working out? How do you start that? And at what point should you bring HR involved? At what point should you? I'm of the fan that you always give constant feedback. You keep people up to speed so they're not blindsided. But let's say you drop the ball a little bit. Maybe you haven't had that constant feedback, or even if you have, maybe the employee isn't quite responding correctly. How do you go about giving that negative feedback, or what's the process?
Okay, so the process is sort of like you laid out. You should be alert to what the new employee is doing all the time. I don't mean from a micromanaging perspective, but I mean how they're getting along, whether they're picking up their tasks properly, interacting with other people in a positive and productive way, all those kinds of things. And the first crucial thing is to notice any patterns that are negative. So everybody makes a mistake or can get on somebody's nerves. All those kinds of things happen. If it happens once, no harm, no foul. But by the time you notice or have heard from team members 3 times that something has gone wrong, you know you have an actual problem. And by that point, if you haven't been doing the ongoing kind of feedback that you talked about, John, you should be actually sitting down with the person. And at any point, you can say to them, well, Sarah, you've been with us now for 15 days, 30 days, 45 days. It's time for us to really look at how things are going. Mm-hmm. And by making that kind of opening statement, you set it up that this is a time for feedback. You set it up that this is a time for us to both check in with each other. And so the rules of the conversation are a little bit established, as opposed to sitting them down and saying, "Oh, I'm hearing these terrible things about you."
Right.
So the first thing is to ask them how they think it's going, because they may know that there's a problem and they may bring it up, and then that's a lot easier for you. So wouldn't it be great if that happens? But if they don't bring it up, you can acknowledge all the things they said about how they feel they're doing fine. And you can say, and I need to tell you, it's come to my attention that you're making this kind of coding error, or your meeting behavior is not exactly the kind of thing we like to see here, whatever the situation might be. And then you have to explain, here is the thing I want to see. And then you have to ask them if they understand and if they're willing to do that. Because what you're looking for is a commitment from them that they realize that they're off course and that they are willing to do the work to get themselves back on course. If you can get that from them, and if you then see improvement, great. You can go on from there. But that's the point at which, if it hadn't already happened, you would bring HR in. Mm-hmm. I noticed this problem. I sat down with Sarah. Here's what happened. I want to make sure you're alerted to it. And then their HR is ready for you if it turns out that Sarah doesn't do any better.
Right. So how many times have you seen where someone says, oh, no, I'm not going to make those changes? It seems like almost everybody would say, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. I didn't realize that. I'll adjust. Isn't that the common answer?
That is the most common answer because, of course, the majority of people want it to work out. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, A, whether they actually have the capability or capacity to make the change. Like it may turn out that they don't really have background in a certain software. And that this is the first time you actually uncover that. They went into it, trying to be a good team member and to do everything, and maybe they just didn't learn something that they needed, and you have to find out if they need remediation in some way, whether you provide that or you tell them to get it on their own, however you work that out.
Right.
So sometimes it's a skill-based thing. I have to say more often than not, when this kind of thing is a problem, it can be a behavioral thing.
Like an attitude or something?
I'm not willing to call it attitude yet.
Okay.
I'm calling it behavior. And that's because the manager, just like we talked about before, may not have explained in detail, this is how we do it here. Okay? So, for example, when we have our daily stand-ups, we're really casual, but whenever we are in the meeting room with any of our owner-client people, we actually behave much more formally. And it may be that the new person hasn't caught on to the fact that the meetings with the other functional departments you're supplying are supposed to be more formal and is still behaving too casually.
Gotcha.
So it's worth explaining whatever the behavioral issue is in detail. Here's what I need you to do. When Dave starts talking in this way, you don't get to roll your eyes and shake your head even if you disagree with him. That looks like disrespect. I don't know how you feel about what Dave's saying, but that looks like disrespect. And then we end up at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. So if you're concerned about what Dave is saying, it may not be the appropriate thing for you as a new person to question him, but you can let me know and I'll ask him questions. Or you can ask him questions about A, B, and C. Give Sarah some guidance so she knows how to do better and not just that you want her to do something differently.
So this kind of means that the manager needs to take ownership of making sure that everything is explained properly and everybody's kind of in alignment. And I think you talked about this a little bit in a TED Talk that you gave, and I'm going to link that up in the show notes for sure, about 5 steps for fixing conflict. And you mentioned that everyone needs to be in alignment, making sure that everybody understands their goals, their needs, and their responsibilities correctly.
Yes. And to one of your earlier points, it often happens that managers think that what they're managing is the work and that the work is getting done. But being able to explain to people how they need to perform, how they need to behave, how they need to self-manage is a crucial part of management. We often don't teach it, but if a manager leaves that out and the employee goes astray, it is the manager's responsibility. Even if the employee is acting badly, it's the manager's responsibility to help them figure out how to do better. It's not just on the employee.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that, in my field especially, you come up, you code software, people say, oh, you're a good software developer, let's make you the manager of the software team. And now we don't want you to code anymore. who want you to manage people and manage projects. And it's a totally different skill set. And a lot of times you think, well, as long as the work gets done, everything is fine. But a lot of times it's not fine. The people aren't necessarily doing the work properly. The standards aren't up. The people aren't happy. You start getting turnover, and lots of bad things can escalate and happen from that point.
That's exactly right. It's so not intuitive to manage other people. It's really hard work.
Yeah, that was one of the things I really struggled with when I first became a manager, was just understanding that there's a difference between getting the work done and growing the people.
Right. You can't just make announcements about what needs to happen and think that everybody's going to, tootle off and just do it the way you have it in your head. Mm-hmm. They need to understand why we're doing it, what are the details, what are the things I have to watch out for, how are we supposed to work together when it doesn't seem like it's going so well. I mean, there's a whole host of things. Being in a workplace is like being in community, dealing with neighbors. There are aspects of it that are like being in family, that are like being in a spousal relationship. And we all know we mess all those things up. So how much more are we likely to misstep when you've got all these human relationship and relating needs and requirements going on at the same time that you're trying to produce work? It's really complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely very complicated. And I think one of my biggest mistakes as an early manager is I thought everybody was like me, and everybody had the same vision, goals, mindset as I did. And it was really difficult for me to put myself in someone else's shoes and have that empathy to understand that someone is slightly differently, or they think differently, they have a different perspective. And, I really struggled where I would say something a certain way and I thought it was very clear, but in reality, the other person didn't see it that way.
You can't see it, but I am nodding at you enthusiastically.
Oh, that's great.
Because that's exactly the point. We do all expect to have our minds read because we think the way we think is how everybody thinks, and it's completely a false belief. So then we get either disappointed or mad when they don't do it the way we think they should know to do it. And then we have feelings involved as the manager or as the colleague when they're really just thinking they did the totally right thing and they can't understand why we're reacting in this way. So you use the term empathy, and that's really important. And there's another term that I'm going to give you that may, in fact, feel better to some people in tech who, many of the people I've worked with in tech, think of themselves, maybe even pride themselves, as not being touchy-feely.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So asking them to have empathy can sometimes make them feel like you're asking them to not be themselves. So I'm going to suggest another approach, which is called perspective taking. And it is a kind of more cognitive or clinical assessment than thinking you are going to feel necessarily with your heart and your gut. Now, I would say as a sidebar that you're always using all of those things as a human. We've got all those things. But if you want to take a more rational thinking approach, then you can do perspective taking the same way as you might in a detective story or a suspense movie where you're trying to figure out what's going on. And you can think about, the line I like is, why would a smart person say a dumb thing like that? I know that Joe is a competent guy and he does things in this good way, so why would he say such a stupid thing that can't possibly work? Well, believe me, Joe has a reason. You just don't see what it is. So thinking through, why would he say that? What is it that he is caring about? What is it that he's worried about? What is it that he's trying to accomplish? And maybe I could just go ask him, Joe, why did you say that thing? I didn't understand where you were coming from. You don't have to say that stupid thing when you go talk to him. That doesn't go over so well. but to actually be curious and take his perspective. And then you can think, oh, I disagree 100%, but now I understand why he said it. So maybe I can find a way to get him what he wants in my way.
I think that was also one of the things that you had as a new teaching habit in your TED Talk. Is one of the new habits was to ask, why would a smart person do a stupid thing?
Yes, you really paid attention.
I try to take some notes.
Yeah.
So when you're doing that and you are trying to take someone else's perspective, and I try to do that actually when I do one-on-ones with my team.
Yep.
And I usually schedule about 15 minutes before the one-on-one where I just shut my laptop and I sit and I think, okay, so what was this person's day like? They have, and I go back and say, well, they have 2 kids. Their kids are in middle school, so they drove their kids to school. They had about a 15-minute commute. It was raining outside, so they're probably annoyed by that. They typically bring their lunch. I try to go through the mindset of what this person's going through right now. They're working on these projects. This project's not going well, but these other 2 are going pretty well. How are they going to come in and sit in my office? Are they going to come in here in fear, or are we going to come in and anticipation? Are they going to be excited? Are they bored? Do they hate these things? Do they think they don't work out? And I try to ask myself all those questions to think about how this person is going to react to any feedback that I give them, or whatever feedback I can get from them. How is that going to play out, and what kind of lens should I try to look at this from? Yes,
that's wonderfully humanizing. And if you don't mind, I want to give you one caution.
Oh, please do.
You could be wrong.
I probably am.
Okay, so this is the thing. And I'm saying this very explicitly from the touchy-feely side. When you think a lot about what's going on with that person and how are they and how do they react and how do they feel, it's very important to go back to the rational thought of, these are the things I've just thought may be the case, but I have to check with them when they come in and see what's actually going on.
But I need to validate it.
Right. Gotcha. Otherwise, it's like those people who have a bad dream. You did a bad thing in their dream, so now they're mad at you. You didn't actually do it, but they dreamed it, so that's their feeling. You have to make sure to deal with what is actually true and not just what's in your head.
So let's go back to the scenario where we're giving this talk with the employee. We've gone through the first round. They've made some adjustments, but not all of them, so we want to come back and revisit this. Do you recommend doing that little feedback sandwich thing where you talk about the positives and the negative, then end with a positive, or how do you recommend actually going through that difficult conversation now that they've made some adjustments, but not all of it?
Okay, so I hate the sandwich. Got to ditch the sandwich.
Me too. Thank you.
Yes, because it's phony. And we all know when we're being manipulated. So if somebody has the practice of the sandwich, when you go talk to them, you are waiting for them to get past the phony compliment or phony pleasantry to the bad thing, So there's no good in that. Much better to say, let's check in now on how it's been going. Now, I would start off, in general, unless there was some terrible violation, I would still start off by asking them how they thought it was going. What have you been working on? What changes have you been making? What is it you want me to know about how things have been going since we had our last talk? So that they get to present and sort of anchor the conversation. Now, the tough part about that is that if you disagree with them, you then have to say you disagree. But in many cases, if you were clear up front and they're really trying, they have improved. So then you can say, Sarah, I want to tell you, this area of effort has really paid off. Here are these things that are getting better. The coding looks better, or I'm getting better reports from whatever the situation is. Acknowledge something that's good because you have to tell them what's good. Now let's turn to the things that you still need to work on. And I'm saying it very carefully that way because what you don't want to say is, Sarah, this has been really improved, but. Because that but sort of kills everything you said before.
Yeah, they forget about that.
Yeah. Whereas if you fully acknowledge these things are really going much better, I'm happy you've been able to work on them. Do you have any other questions about them? Great. Okay, now let's turn to something else. Let's look at the things you still need to improve going forward. So then it's not like they're a screw up. They've already accomplished these things, and now we're looking at those things. And then you have to lay out even more clearly than the first time whatever aspects aren't going well. And the reason I say even more clearly is because if you say it the way you said it the first time, but they weren't successful after the first time, you don't want to be beating a dead horse. You need to find a new way in. So you may have to ask them more questions about what's still not working, or how did they approach it, and let's see what we can debug about it, whether there are other people who should be part of their process who could be helpful to them, that sort of thing. And in this follow-up conversation, depending on whether you're seeing real effort and it's just that it hasn't paid off yet, if you think that they may be unwilling, then you may have to raise the issue of consequences if they don't make the change.
So at this point, then you raise the consequences if it seems like there's not the agreement upon the
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Because if they are still 100% willing, they may say, I actually did not have the time to get to this because of the crunch on the ABC project.
Yeah.
And that's true. So you could say, oh, okay, I'm giving you a pass over the next 3 weeks. Here's what I expect to see. Does that seem okay to you? And they say, yes. Good. Terrific. But if they say, well, I don't really see that that's so important, then you have to make clear that it is, and that in fact accomplishing it may be a condition of their being successful here.
You have such a way of putting things in a nice tone. I've got to use to take people saying stuff like, and if you don't do this, you'll be fired.
Right. So at some point, you do need to say that,
Mm-hmm.
It may get down to that, but there's no reason to get there until it's necessary.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you come at it from the perspective that they want to do the right thing, that they want to be successful, then you don't want them to feel threatened in, an existential way, because when people are afraid, they have a hard time doing well. Then they're always looking over their shoulder and they're obsessing. Then they're not focused on the work. So you want to emphasize what help there is for the work and what support you can provide for the work and your confidence in their ability to do the work if you believe they can do it. If you think they're a bad person, though, that they're really messing stuff up, you really need to be working with your HR group, because every once in a while there is somebody who doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about employment as opposed to love is businesses don't pay people to come and not do the work right. You do have a legitimate footing to say, I'm sorry, this didn't work out. You're a lovely person. As an employee, though, it's not successful.
Yeah, and I always have this, and this is where sometimes me and different people that I've worked with in the past have some conflict and disagreement upon, is I don't like the saying that, we're family at this company. I like to say that we're a team at this company, and the reason why is because my family is my family no matter what. My kids will always be my kids, and there's nothing that they can do that would make me eject them from the family. But
right.
My team, I think about a football team. I'm going to block for you. We're going to win together. We're going to lose together. We're going to be part of the team. But if you're not cutting it, you can get cut from the team.
So I think that's legitimate. I think the thing about we're a family is a way to say we're all going to like each other. And you don't actually need to all like each other, certainly not all to the same degree.
Right.
The thing that gets tricky is when the business happens to be a family business. And then there are issues of family in there. But I agree with you 100% that employment and family are not the same thing, even when they overlap. And being phony or overextending about how far you think the relationship should go when the professional relationship isn't working, it's like sweeping the dirt under the rug.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I wanted to close out with one last thing. In your talk, you talked about the 5 steps for fixing conflict. I was wondering if you can just quickly go through those and help us, because I'll go through them and you can just help me out understanding, make sure I got all these fully. Rule out that a single individual is the source of the conflict, because sometimes you could have just a bully on your team that needs to go,
right?
And or an incompetent employee that just somehow they got to where they are, but they shouldn't.
Right.
I think we've seen that before in technology. But then number 2 is to ask the right people the right question. How do you know who the right people are?
So generally, the right people are the ones who are the closest to the actual work itself. And in IT, that might be 2 different kinds of things. One is the people who are not necessarily the project manager, but the people who are actually doing the work. That's one construct. But the other thing is that in many companies, IT is a service function as opposed to a development function per se, if what you're selling is software. And in a company where IT is a support function, it's really important to ask questions of the people who will be using the software on a day-to-day basis and what their needs are, and not just of their VP who may be dictating what the project is supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that's good. I've talked about that before, about doing field trips and taking ride-alongs with
yes.
service technicians or something like that. I think that's a fantastic way to actually see how people are really using the software and not the way that their boss says that they're using the software.
That's right. If you don't understand what's going on at the worker level for any issue, not just IT related, you are very likely to make some kind of mistake in figuring out what you want to do next.
Yeah, and one of the examples that I use whenever I'm talking to someone about that is to, I would never go to the vice president of finance to ask them, what kind of toilet cleaner I should buy for our janitors. No, you're going to go ask the janitors which one works the best. That's right. Yeah. Okay, and the next one we kind of already talked about was to make sure that everyone is aligned and having the same goals, needs, responsibilities. Anything we want to add to that?
The only thing I would say there is you don't have to love it. Mm. You have to agree to it. You don't have to love it. So you may feel that the company is actually going in a direction that is not perfect, but it's okay. You might know a more elegant way of developing something. You might think, I don't know, adding another feature would make us more competitive and they don't want to pay to add the feature. But if you agree to stay there and do the work, at some point you have to say, yes, this is the work we're doing, as opposed to, dragging your feet and hanging your head and saying, I hate this work. I wish I didn't have to do it. So you need to understand and accept where we're going so that we can all go together.
Yeah, that's good. So the next one was find allies at all levels in the organization. How do we go about finding those allies? And why is that important?
It's important because you can't do it alone.
Yes.
No person, I don't care if they're the CEO, is strong enough to do it alone. And that's true sometimes even when you only have one person. I mean, I'm one person, and sometimes I disagree with myself and can't get the thing done. Think about that magnified over numerous people. You have to find people who are willing, just like you said before, to be on your team for this initiative. They may not always be on your team, could be a fluid situation. But for the thing you're trying to change now, yeah, they're willing to play ball. Your rules, your game. And you look for them, not just who are the people who've agreed with you, but who are the people who might be curious, and therefore you could get a real dialogue going so that they could see your point and why you feel so strongly about something. Or you think about who are the people for whom it would be an advantage later if it works out, and you try to get them to buy in early. You're just looking for support, and again, you want this at every level. For IT leaders, if you get agreement at the top of your organization, but there are managers in between you and the front line, and those mid-level managers don't agree, your initiative can be hamstrung. And so you really need to make sure that you have allies at every level who are aligned, who do agree that this is what we're doing, and who want it to succeed. And then they're helpful to you through the whole stream and across all processes.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's one of the things that every new leader should do in their first 90 days is to try to seek out and build those relationships to have those allies when you need them in the future.
Correct. You have to invest. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can't draw on an empty bank account.
Exactly. Got to get that social capital in, right?
Right.
Okay, Tech, you talked about teaching new habits as well, and we've already talked about that question about why would a smart person do a stupid thing and try to think through that. What were some of the other habits that are important?
One is to ask what's not being said.
That's good.
And in the TED Talk, that was the thing about playing the elephant card. Sometimes there's something going on, and you can't quite put your finger on it. But you're missing something, something's not quite right. It makes sense to try to find out. Is there anything else I should know about this? Is there anything else that you're worried about? You could ask your internal client, tell me your concerns about what might go wrong for you through the length of this project. Ask them to put it on the table. That way, even if you know it's not a problem, you can be aware of what their worries are. And that's a way to help create an ally out of them, even if they're afraid. If you show respect for their concerns and how you're treating them, that's better. So looking for what's not being said or what hasn't been addressed yet is another one that's very important. I'll give you another one that's kind of a funny one. If you're having trouble figuring out how to deal with someone, so say you're waiting for one of your one-on-ones in that 15 minutes and you just can't figure out how you're going to work with these people, a technique, and that's all this is. It is a technique. It is not the truth. A technique is to think about what would they have been like when they were 9 years old.
Oh, wow, that's good.
Okay, because sometimes you can just picture them, how they might have been at 9, and you understand some of the motivations that they might have or fears that they might have in a way that when you are thinking about their polished and professional self are not so obvious. But you think about them as a kid and you think, oh, this would be something that would really get under her skin. So let me address it up front.
Yeah, I think it's hard I know whenever I look at someone, I only see them in their current state of where they are right now. And it's hard to think about each one of these people were a baby at some point,
That's right. But it's when we're kids, actually, that we learn most of our habits about how to deal with other people. Because that's all they are. They're habits. They're habits based on how our parents behaved. They're habits based on how our first grade teacher was. Those kinds of things. But unless something happens to change them, we might keep those our whole lives.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's definitely something I guess I just never really thought about, what was this person like at 9? But yeah, if you go back to that mindset will definitely help you
Right.
have
Right.
at least another perspective.
Don't treat them like they're 9.
Right.
That's very bad news.
Yeah.
But insight, you're always looking for other insights. A lot of this just boils down to how can I be curious about this situation to get a better angle on it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good. Well, I really appreciate having you on the show. Any other pieces of advice you want to offer to our listeners, or any way that they can reach out and connect with you and maybe learn more about some of the things that you've shared today?
So the best way to find me is on my website, which is lizkislik.com. And it'll be in the show notes, I guess, so I don't have to spell it right now.
I'll definitely link it up.
So that's good. And for anybody who is concerned about interpersonal dynamics, I've got a free ebook on there that they may want to get, and that also comes along. I have a weekly blog and a monthly newsletter that might be of value.
Yeah.
And they can also see my TEDx. But those are basically the ways, and they can find me on LinkedIn, of course, also at Liz Kislik.
All right, I'll link all that up in the show notes. Your LinkedIn, your TED Talk, I'm putting that in there as well, and your website. And I really appreciate having you on. It's been fantastic. I feel like I definitely got a good session there of how to deal with conflict and employee performance.
Oh, I'm so happy. Thanks for the opportunity.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview as much as I did, and if so, please share this with a friend. Pass it along, share it on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever you share your stuff. And I would greatly appreciate it. Feel free to tag me, and I'll probably like it or retweet it or something to that effect. But thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing the show. Thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Thank you guys so much.